Picture this, you're out of the pub where there's some live music on. There's a voice as well shouting from somewhere at the back of the room, constantly requesting Black Velvet Band to be played. A few people sigh, a few people cheer, but you've had a few drinks yourself and you're singing along with everybody else. Maybe you're the person who knows the entire lyrics off by heart. Maybe you're the type who pretends they do and sings gibberish for the verses but belts out the chorus at the top of your lungs. Sure, it's grand, nobody can hear you, right? But maybe you're the guy in the corner performing it, sick and fed up of getting requested to play it at every gig, hoping that someday somebody just asks you to sing Enya's May It Be just once. In this video anyway, we're going to take a look at the song Black Velvet Band, but we're really going to put it to the test. Do we actually know the story behind it? We'll look at the story within the song and the true crime aspect of it. We'll then swap to the actual real world historical events that the song is aligned with. The 7 years of punishing work and suffering in Australia, but also the awful journey they had to endure. And also at the end of the video, I'll have a bit of news for you all, and something you can probably take part in, so stick around until then to find out. But first, why do we even know the song in the first place? Why is it so well known around the world? Well, for that, you can thank the one and only the Dubliners. Back in 1962, this group of lads from Dublin took a dusty old street ballad and turned it into something else entirely. It was their 1967 version with the voice of Luke Kelly's that sent it into the stratosphere. Funnily enough as well, Luke himself had learned the tune at a workshop ran by Ewan Nicole in London from an old English folk singer from Norfolk called Harry Cox. But when the Dubliners released it, it just took off. It climbed to number 4 in the Irish charts and even cracked the top 20 over in the UK.
Her eyes, they shone like diamonds. I thought her the queen of the land, and her hair it hung over her shoulder, tied up with a black velvet band.
But they did more than just record a hit. They took this almost forgotten story and breathed new life into it. A harrowing tale about exile and being shipped off to another part of the world. But here's the thing, while you might know the chorus, I bet you don't even know the dark little true crime story that's hiding just under the surface. Like, what did the young fella in the song actually do? What was the crime that sealed his fate? To get to the bottom of it, let's look at the words themselves. Because this isn't so much of a love song. It plays out more like a trap being set. Our story starts with a young lad, an apprentice just trying to make his way in the world, out on a stroll one day, on his day off. His whole life changes when he bumps into this pretty fair maid, and she's a picture, you know? In the song it tells us that she's got like a neck like a swan, eyes shining like diamonds, and her hair, of course, tied back in that famous black velvet band. He's completely taken with her, instantly thinking she must be the queen of the land. But this isn't a love story, like I said. It's a setup, pure and simple. As the two of them are walking, some wealthy fella happens to pass by, and our man sees a look in her eye, a flash in that roguish black eye, that tells him she's up to no good. We've all seen it before. Before he can even draw a breath, she's lifted the man's gold watch, slick as you like. But here's the thing, instead of running off with it, she turns and slips the watch straight into the young fella's hand, and he ends up getting caught with it. In a heartbeat, she's vanished into the crowd, leaving him standing there to take the blame. The next thing he knows, he's being dragged before a judge, with the watch found on him as well. The case is just proven clear. His life is turned upside down, all thanks to a woman he's just only met. Now here's where this story takes a wee bit of a turn. In that Dubliners version we all know, Luke Kelly sings about it all happening in a neat little town called Belfast.
In a neat little town they call Belfast, apprentice to trade I was bound, and many an hour sweet happiness have I spent in that neat little town.
It makes it sound completely authentically Irish, right? But here's a wee twist that's common with folk songs. The song wasn't originally Irish at all. That whole Belfast setting is a later addition. If you dig back to the first printed copies of the song from the 1840s, the story is set firmly in England. The crime takes place in Barking in Essex, or sometimes on the notorious Ratcliffe Highway in the East End of London. The original lad wasn't an Irish apprentice, he was an English one, caught up in an English crime. So that leaves a massive question hanging in the air. How on earth did a story about a petty crime in England become one of the greatest Irish folk songs? Well, the answer is all in the punishment. The story of Black Velvet Band is about a working class fella standing in front of a British judge, being condemned and shipped off to a brutal penal colony. And for the Irish, that story hit a nerve. The British penal system here, the threat of being exiled, that was a painful and very real part of our own history, a tool of oppression. So the Irish simply took the song and made it their own. The location was changed from London to Belfast, or sometimes even Tralee or even Dunmanway in Cork. Irish singers just claimed this story for themselves. They kept the catchy melody but used the words to talk about their own experience, turning it into a song of cultural mourning. But that leads to another question here. If this was just some local English crime story from the 1840s, long before radio or records or the internet, how did it travel so far? How did a tale like this manage to cross the Irish Sea and spread like wildfire? Well, it's because the song was basically the 19th century version of clickbait. It was originally sold as a broadside ballad. A broadside here was just a single sheet of cheap paper printed on one side, and it was the tabloid news and the true crime podcast of its day, all rolled into one. For a penny as well, anybody could buy the lyrics on the street. But you wouldn't just be handed the sheet quietly. You'd have travelling salesmen and singers standing on street corners, singing the songs to the crowd. They'd put sensationalist new lyrics to tunes people already knew. And it was a brilliant bit of marketing, really. And these broadsides covered all the most shocking stories of the day, like disasters, hangings, robberies, and especially cautionary tales designed to warn young people about the dangers waiting for them in the big city. And Black Velvet Band here was exactly that. It was a warning printed on cheap paper and sold onto the streets to put the fear of God into ordinary working people. But when you stop and think about it, the punishment doesn't fit the crime at all, does it? The poor lad isn't just sent to the local jail for having a stolen watch. He's exiled and shipped off to a penal colony on the other side of the world. Why was the justice system so incredibly harsh? Let's imagine the cold, hard logic of the time there. This wasn't just about stopping a petty crime now. Let's remember there was an empire to be built at this time. The truth is, the fella in our song here was one of the lucky ones. Before his time in the 17th and 18th centuries, the English justice system was so severe, they called it the Bloody Code. And under this code, hanging was the standard punishment for a huge list of pretty minor crimes. You step out of line, you didn't just get a slap on the wrist, you were sent to the gallows. But you can't just go around hanging every pickpocket. It wasn't really sustainable, and a lot of judges thought it was just too much for small offences. So the government needed another way to get these undesirables off the streets for good, but one that could be framed as a merciful alternative to hanging. Maybe there's a little bit of money to be made as well. And that's where penal transportation came in. This was a stroke of genius, in a way, for the empire. Politically, it cleaned the streets of criminals and the poor back home. And economically, it provided a constant, massive supply of free labour to build up Britain's new colonies. Transportation became a business. Merchants would get contracts to ship prisoners overseas, where they'd then sell on their labour to the colonists. The British Empire was quite literally built on the backs of these exiles. And that brings us right back to the courtroom in the song. The judge looks down at this poor lad and he says, "We'll give you 7 years penal servitude." Now that number there, right? 7 years. Why 7? It isn't just a random lyric the songwriter picked because it rhymes. It is chillingly accurate, and it points to a system driven by pure, ruthless capitalism. So what was so special about this number? Well, it all comes down to a law called the Transportation Act of 1717. This was the law that made transportation a standard sentence for crimes that weren't serious enough for hanging, like, say, being caught with a stolen watch, or singing gibberish for the verse because you're too drunk to remember. But the 7-year part, that was all about business. See, the government paid private merchants to ship these prisoners across the ocean. The merchants made their money by selling the convicts as indentured servants to plantation owners and the likes of that. Now, at the time, a normal person who chose to become an indentured servant might sign on for 4 years, maybe 6 at a push. A convict, though, came with a criminal record. They were seen as damaged goods, so buyers weren't really as keen. The British legal system solved this by making the convict a better bargain. They fixed the minimum sentence at 7 years, guaranteeing a buyer a much longer period of forced labour than they could get from a regular servant. The young fella in our song here wasn't just being punished now. His life was being priced up, packaged and sold to the highest bidder to make the empire richer. Now, the song ends with our man arriving in Australia, and when we think of penal transportation, that's really where our minds usually go, is just to Australia. But here's the thing. For the Irish, the nightmare of being shipped off didn't really start with Australia. It had started over 100 years earlier and on a completely different side of the planet. To get to the real deep-seated trauma that a song like Black Velvet Band taps into, we have to go all the way back to the 1650s and the Cromwellian invasion of Ireland. After a brutal war, Cromwell had 2 problems. He wanted to get rid of any Irish Catholic resistance, and he needed cheap labour for the booming sugar plantations in the West Indies. His solution was horrific. The English started rounding up thousands of Irish people. Not just soldiers now, but civilians, vagrants, poor people, anyone they didn't like the look of. It's estimated around 12,000 Irish men, women and even children were forcibly shipped across the Atlantic to places like Barbados to work on the plantations. Because these indentured servants were only there for a fixed number of years, the plantation owners saw them as completely disposable, and the conditions waiting for them were beyond belief. They had no reason to keep them alive beyond their contract. One fella who visited Barbados at the time wrote that the cruelty he saw inflicted on these servants was so bad, he couldn't believe one Christian could do this to another. But now, let's just jump back a little bit. Let's jump back to the 19th century and Australia, where our song ends up. Think about our young fella from the song again. When lads like him arrived in Australia, places like Van Diemen's Land or New South Wales, they were fed straight into the system. They'd be assigned as servants to free settlers or put into government work gangs, breaking rocks, building roads. A life of hard labour, basically. But before any of them could actually face their new fate in the New World, they had to survive the journey. We have to remember that. Across the centuries, it could take anywhere between 3 and 8 months to get there, depending on the era. And there was no luxury, right? Getting to Australia was a nightmare that began long before the ship ever set sail. I'd say you'd even be relieved to start your hard manual labour after it all. I couldn't imagine what these diseased, rotting ships were like. And as well, if you're familiar with what happened on that cruise ship back in 2013, in the Gulf of Mexico, I think, the ship broke down for some reason, and the people were subjected to like something 3 or 4 days of miserable conditions. Now, of course, these cruise ships, there were more people on board, right? And they're not built assuming that, they're going to be floating broken down for 3-4 days at a time. But still, imagine trying to survive those conditions for 3 months with no TikTok to complain about the lack of toilets. So anyway, our lad from the song didn't really get any special treatment, basically. And he first had to actually make it to Australia. So imagine this. You're in chains, and you're staring up at the rotting hulk of an old decommissioned warship. These floating prisons were moored in the Thames or at Portsmouth, and inside they were just damp, dark, suffocating hellholes packed with condemned men. You could be stuck in one of these hulks, as they were called, for months. The conditions were just disgusting, filthy, overcrowded, and riddled with disease. You were thrown in with the most violent criminals as well, with no doctors and no help. In the early days, almost a third of the prisoners held on these floating tombs died before they even saw the transport ship. If you were lucky enough to survive that, you were then loaded onto a ship for the voyage itself, which could take anywhere between 3 to 8 months, like we mentioned. And in the beginning, that journey was practically a death sentence. On one of the early fleets, the convicts were chained up in heavy irons that had been designed for the slave trade. They were packed in below deck with no air, terrible food, freezing, and drenched when the weather turned bad. Disease spread like wildfire, and if you stepped out of line, a lashing from a cat o' nine tails could strip the flesh from your back, leaving you open to fatal infection. It was only later that the British government realised that dead convicts can't build their empire. They had to protect their investment, so eventually they brought in stricter rules, put naval surgeons on every ship to make sure things were kept clean. And that actually brought the death rate on the voyage right down. But surviving the journey didn't mean you were safe. It just meant you'd arrived at the final stop. The last haunting line of the song serves as a warning.
So come on! jolly young fellows, a warning take by me. When you are out on the town, me lads, beware of the pretty colleens. They'll feed you with strong drink, me lads, till you are unable to stand. And the very first thing that you'll know is you've landed in Van Diemen's land.
So what was this place? Why was it the ultimate threat? Well, Van Diemen's Land, an island just off the south coast of Australia, was the Empire's main penal colony. It took in about 40% of all the convicts sent down under, and its reputation was absolutely terrifying. With prisons like Port Arthur and Macquarie Harbour, the island became known for inescapable brutality and suffering. The history of the place was so dark, the suffering so ingrained in the soil, that when the time came, the government knew they couldn't just close the prisons. They had to do something more drastic. So in 1856, when the island got its own government, one of the first things that they did was scrub the name Van Diemen's Land from the map completely. They rebranded it, calling it Tasmania. It was a desperate attempt to wash away the stain of its horrifying past. So the next time you have a go at remembering the verses after a few too many, just remember that it isn't just a simple tale about a stolen watch or a pretty girl with a black velvet band in her hair. Remember the ruthless system that built an empire behind it, and the brutal journey to the other side of the world that so many people endured. And as well, it's a warning about a place so horrific they had to get rid of its very name from the earth. It all comes down to that haunting final line, that chilling thought that warned a generation. And the very next thing that you'll know is you've landed in Van Diemen's Land.
Her eyes, they shone like diamonds.
So it's the end of the video, but don't leave just yet. I've something to tell you, and I would love to see if people would be interested. Would you like a platform that's kinda like YouTube or Spotify, right? But it's for trad, folk songs, poetry and stories. The very tradition basically that songs like Black Velvet Band survived on. Think of it as somewhere you can go and engage with musicians around the world, listen to their performances of your favourite songs, create playlists, like, comment, and upload your own stuff even, post it for the world to hear. Like maybe you're a composer yourself, maybe you like to arrange trad tunes, or maybe even your grandfather has a story about something really interesting that should not be forgotten when he's gone. So yeah, think of it as YouTube or Spotify even, but with a mix of the Irish traditional music archive thrown in there as well. I do lean more towards Spotify as it's really only audio at the moment due to storage, right? Audio is obviously a lot smaller than video, but I won't get into too much details. But if this is something you'd like to be part of, comment below and mention whether you're a musician or maybe you'd just be interested in casual listening. I have built the beginnings of this platform and I would like to open it up to more people, to all of you, to expand the testing a little bit more. There will be a lot of bugs to iron out obviously, and I'll need to make the interface a little bit more user-friendly over time, but I can fix that with more feedback from the community. I do really feel that this is something we need. While we do have YouTube, which is great in its own way, a lot of the good, genuine content gets buried under more popular content or big creators who understand the algorithm. Our traditional roots should never be forgotten while we move further into this digital era. I think we do have to adapt just a little bit, and I think this can give a platform for everybody to show off their own stuff. So yeah, comment down below and I'll give you more details there. All of this, even the project I was just talking about, couldn't have been made possible without the support of our channel members and Patreon members. Thanks so much to you all as always. Let's also extend a warm welcome to our new members here. Graham Nelson 4868, Keith Wood 2193, Lucy Cooper 9475, Sam Bunny and Bernard McGuinness. Glad to have you all here. Thanks so much for supporting the channel. If you'd like to join them, you can do so by clicking the join button down below or check out the links in the description for more information. But anyway, look, I'm going to leave it at that. Thanks again to you all for watching. I hope you all have a great day. Slán go fóill. Cheers.
Till you are unable to stand. And the very first thing that you'll know is you've landed in Van Diemen's Land. Her eyes, they shone like diamonds. Her neck, it was just like a swan.